Hello, my name is Anthony Moore. I'm the CEO of American Eagle Gold, and with me here today, I have Neil Prouse, who's our lead geo for our Knack project. I'm Charlie Gregg, who's our technical advisor from GT Gold fame, and I have Steve McMullen, who's our geophysicist for our Knack project. He's based in Botswana, and he's from the Ivanhoe fame. So we have a good team of technical people here. We want to give everyone the opportunity to learn a little bit more about Knack and why we're drilling, where we're drilling, and talk a bit about the 2022 drill program. So Neil's going to do the presentation. He's going to share his screen. If you have any questions, type them to me in the chat, and we'll have a small Q&A session afterwards. If you have any questions after, if you want to talk more about the company, etc., happy to have a call. We're going to record this. We're going to share it with the investment community. So thank you very much for attending. And Neil, thank you for agreeing to do this. You can share screen.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, we'll get into it. Okay, all right, let's get into it. Yeah, so if you guys have been sort of following the American Eagle story and the Knack project story, this will be a fairly familiar presentation, at least for the first part of it. But we'll just go through everything, what we did in 2022. Why we're so excited, and start that off with a bit of background about the property, where we are, what we're exploring for analog wise. Yeah, so we'll get into it. Yeah, so first and foremost, property is in central BC on the sort of interior plateau area, so pretty gentle, undulating terrain, forested, but lots of active logging in the region. So access is pretty good. Because of that, it's all truck accessible. Smithers is nearby. There's a number of logging camps in the area that are nearby. Water access is really good. And so because of this, you can explore pretty much year round. So it's a really, really good place to be exploring, especially within British Columbia. There's really a lot of opportunity for cutting a lot of costs, right? You don't need the helicopter. So yeah, it's efficiency wise, economy wise, it's yeah, really good low cost exploration area. We are in the Babine district, Babine Porphyry district. So this was an area that was explored in the 70s and 60s, primarily by Noranda and other earlier companies. And in the late 60s, they identified the Bell and Granite deposits, which were actually developed and mined between early 70s and early 90s. And there's the Morrison deposit, which is actually a little bit closer to the Knack property, which is also, you know, an economically viable deposit. It's not being exploited for environmental reasons and some cultural reasons. But that said, we have avoided any of those issues with Knack. Knack is actually in a very good location for a potential mine one day, and that's our hope. And you can see how close it is to Smithers down here in the bottom left corner. It's about 85 kilometers as the crow flies, so super close to infrastructure. Historically on the property, there was quite a bit of work done by Noranda in the 60s and 70s to identify the area as a potential porphyry target. That said, it was still pretty remote back in the 70s. It was all helicopter supported, very, very small drill rig equipment. And in the Noranda phase of exploration, they drilled 28 holes totaling only 1,800 meters. So really shallow average hole depth, basically just testing the bedrock surface below the overburden for a lot of these holes, and max hole down to around sort of 70 to 100 meters. So really not testing very deep. But still, with that, they did find quite widespread near-surface mineralization that sort of identified this as a target. The focus of their exploration in the region, though, was on the closer Bell and Granite deposits. So this one kind of fell by the wayside until the 90s, when Hera Exploration picked it up and drilled 71 holes for a total of 15,187 meters. So a little bit more of an expansive drill program, but still only an average hole depth of 216 meters, and only 7 of these holes of the 71 holes actually tested greater than 300 meters true depth below surface. The deepest of which only tested 466 meters below surface. So really, literally just scratching the surface of this deposit, or potential deposit. In that phase of drilling, they identified 2 main zones of distinct mineralization. There's the North Copper Zone, which was more widespread over a larger area, very rudimentary, non-43-101, back of the envelope calculations of a body of rock of about 217 million tons. So really good size extent in that North Copper Zone, but the grade is low by traditional porphyry standards, only 0.185% copper, and very little gold in that North Copper Zone. The South Copper Zone was a little bit smaller, but actually a really decent gold grade for a porphyry deposit, 0.25 grams per ton gold on average, and 0.17 copper. So kind of the reason this wasn't explored beyond that, there's really excellent size potential, is at the time, access and the lower grade, it wasn't that attractive a target. It was picked up again in 2008, and they identified some actually pretty decent higher grade in the South Zone. But again, it was a very, very small program, only 970 meters. And then the whole 2008, 2009 banking collapse happened, and a lot of projects were dropped at that time, and nothing of really any substance was done aside from some remote sensing geophysical surveys and a couple IP surveys were performed in the time since. So yeah, when we got to the property, the targeting was based on a geophysical reinterpretation, sort of spearheaded by Steve McMullen, who's on the call here. And this is sort of an image going through where the historical near-surface drilling was done and the geological interpretation from that drilling identified a porphyry stock inferred to be analogous to the other Babine Suite intrusive stocks in the area that are sourcing the mineralization for Bell, Grand Island, Morrison. And this is also really outlined quite well by the geophysics. So really with the geophysics and the known surface extent of the porphyry stock outline, it kind of fits a classic porphyry model. There's a broad annular magnetic high centered about the intrusive stock and marginal to it. And it's flanked by an even broader phyllic alteration halo. So this is magnetic susceptibility near surface. This is 50-meter depth IP image. And it really shows just how well that porphyry stock is flanked by this broad alteration halo. This the IP chargeability high is interpreted to be disseminated pyrite, indicative of the phyllic zone. And these sort of middling to low middling IP responses are pretty consistent with mineralized potassic alteration. And this is kind of supported by the historical drilling and the drilling we did in 2022. So really there's a very compelling geophysical model. An inversion of the Z10 data shows a coincident resistivity high and magnetic susceptibility high, flanking the margin of the intrusion and extending to depth. And because the property hadn't been drilled to any real depth before, it was viewed as a really strong candidate to host deeper, higher grade porphyry mineralization, flanked by what we know is a broad, very anomalous halo of mineralization. So yeah, that was the plan going into 2022, was to test this deeper geophysical target and see if we can get to a high grade source for what was historically discovered. When we got to the property, or when we started doing analysis of the property and planning, the most recent Google Earth imagery at the time was from 2005, 2002 imagery, shows all the historical little clear cuts, and really just access trail. Closer to the date, Google updated their imagery, and it shows cut blocks and logging roads right into the center of the property, right into where the planned collars were. So you really couldn't go any better for planning a BC exploration program. So we were really, really lucky right off the bat that we were able to access the property so easily. It required about 600 meters of rehabilitating some deactivated logging road, and center of the property is you can back a truck right up to the drill rigs. So yeah, summary of the program in 2022, just a very simple image of the drill traces and the collar location. We drilled 7 drill holes, totaling almost 6,000 meters. With the planning and the permitting, we were able to drill the holes along about a 750 meter strike length north-south fence with a single step out hole to the east, drilling towards the west. Right along the flank of that inferred Babian porphyry stock intrusion. And the results were excellent even right off the start. All holes encountered broad zones of strong visual copper mineralization, and we'll get into some of those, both geology results and the assay results here. So right off the bat in hole 1, we collared about 96 meters away from the nearest high grade hole in the south zone. So this was about 100 meter step out. Vertical hole drilled, and right off the top we encountered 135 meters 1% copper equivalent. And that copper equivalent, actually, because this is the south zone and it's quite gold anomalous, was about 1 gram per ton gold and about 0.3% copper. And that was great and somewhat unexpected. We were expecting to hit pretty solid grade, but not that high. That's quite a bit higher than anything historically drilled, especially over an interval that broad. What was really compelling about this first hole was that once we got below about 300 meters and we're consistently into this pink unit, which is our granodiorite, our Babian porphyry stock, we kept seeing bornite mineralization, and it increased in abundance and frequency as we got deeper. Bornite is really, really encouraging to see in a porphyry setting. A lot of porphyry deposits, bornite is associated with higher gold grades. Gold is accommodated into its structure better than chalcopyrite, which is the other primary copper ore mineral. And bornite itself actually hosts higher concentration of copper. So chalcopyrite, the primary copper ore mineral, is about 34% copper by weight. Bornite is about 60% copper by weight. So higher grade, you don't need as much of it. And if that is your primary copper ore, that makes for a very rich concentrate. So we were seeing bornite right away in this first hole. And its style of mineralization was quite interesting. So the porphyry stock itself isn't super mineralized, which is kind of expected. But along fracture surfaces and in narrow veinlets and rare thicker veins, it hosts bornite and chalcopyrite, and the bornite increases in abundance with depth. So we kept the hole going. The plan was always test down sort of below that 800 meter mark. And around 800 meters, we hit a zone of very dense chalcopyrite, semi-massive chalcopyrite, and bornite mineralization over a pretty sizable interval. So that 64 meter interval of depth there was averaging 0.8% copper equivalent. And that's dominantly copper. So yeah, right off the bat, hole 1, very encouraging. Given what we saw in hole 1, and knowing the distance between the planned step outs, we decided for hole 2 to shallow it up, drilling along that north-south fence, and see how the surface mineralization tracked and what we would encounter at depth, hoping to hit more of that bornite. Surface mineralization, again, very strong in hole 2. 300 meters from surface, grading 0.61% copper equivalent. So very, very strong near surface results. That's averaging from surface, it's about 0.2% copper and 0.5% gold, 0.22% copper, 0.5% gold. So very strong gold results, and not terrible copper results either, given that it's near surface. What was really compelling about hole 2, more so than hole 1, is when we got down to about 900 meters depth, we hit a unit that we had not seen before. And this was a plagioclase spheric porphyritic dike, likely of andesitic composition, sort of pale to darkish green brown mass, fine grained with these nice white plagioclase phenocrysts in it. And within that unit, there was abundant disseminated bornite, coarsely disseminated to finely disseminated, was a little bit finer along the dike margins, coarser towards the dike center. And it also hosted veins of bornite within it. And the disseminations in the veins of bornite appeared to be in equilibrium with the host rock. And that means they don't appear to be altering the host rock, which makes it look like, you know, that bornite, that sulfide is probably primary to the composition of that melt that these dikes are sourced from. So it's given us indication that at depth, there is potentially a higher grade source. Where this dike intercepts, the frequency of bornite veins and veinlets within the granite diorite strongly increases in abundance as well. So it appears to be the driving force between at least the bornite phase of this mineralization. So really, really good to see. After that, we continue with the plan. We step to the north. We drill hole 3, which is about a 300-meter northern step out from holes 1 and 2. Drilled down to a depth of 941 meters. Didn't hit the really strongly visually mineralized zones, but still very strongly anomalous. Lots of, you know, trace to 1-2% chalcopyrite mineralization throughout the ground mass of the rock. Much thicker package of volcanics. We didn't get into the intrusive till about 600 meters depth, which shows that contact is dipping a little bit. It's not a perfectly vertical contact with the intrusion. So this is all really good information for us to be gathering as we look to develop a model. And that said, even though hole 3 was what, you know, we would consider for this program a dead hole, it's still not dead by any stretch. It's, you know, it graded 0.2% copper over its entire length. And yeah, we mineralized from top to bottom. Just not eye-popping high copper grades, still very good to see that much copper over that broad an interval. Hole 4 was what was, you know, probably our most exciting hole of the program. Unfortunately, we lost it due to a really sort of clay-rich faulted zone down at about 550 meters. But near surface, very strong copper mineralization. And keep in mind, this is transitioning from the south zone to that historically defined north zone that we talked about earlier. And hole 3 sort of colored in between the two zones. So the near surface mineralization in hole 4 was copper dominant, very, very little gold near surface. See over here, near surface grade, first 146 meters, 0.07 grams per ton gold, but 0.44% copper. So dominantly copper rich near surface. And then a broad stretch, about 200 meters of mineralized, but weakly mineralized rock that historically, that was considered shutdown rock by the people drilling in the 90s. So not super strongly mineralized, definitely not as strongly visually mineralized as the preceding 150 meters above it. The plan was always to push it to depth. So thankfully at about 360 meters, mineralization picked up markedly. So there was abundant bornite disseminations, chalcopyrite disseminations, veins, veinlets, all within the primary unit here is this sort of conglomeratic looking rock. So rounded clasts, really interesting, almost spheric looking matrix. The interpretation is that it's a, you know, volcaniclastic or reworked volcaniclastic unit, which is pretty consistent with what we inferred to be the host rocks Hazelton group in the area. But that conglomeratic unit makes for a very, very good host for mineralization. And in hole 4 down deep, it was hosting a lot of bornite. And with that, there was a pretty strong increase in the gold grade. You know, the average gold grade in that north zone is low, like 0.04 grams per ton. When we got down below 360 meters, gold picked up to about 0.27 grams per ton over an 88 meter interval, and 0.23 grams per ton over the lower 185 meters. And copper grade very strong. 0.5% copper. So the lower 185 meters, 0.74% copper equivalent, with a higher grade zone down towards the bottom of the hole of 88.8 meters of almost 1% copper equivalent. So very, very encouraging to see. What was very interesting about this hole as well is that at about 500 meters, we hit the exact same dike with the same bornite mineralization that we hit at the bottom of hole 2. So now we've seen another instance of this over, you know, this is true distance away is about 400 meters. So there's a widespread now instance of this bornite hosting very strongly mineralized intrusive rock that is geochemically and visually, geologically distinct from the hosting granodiorite and the bounding volcanics. So even more support to the theory that somewhere on this property there's this high grade, very strongly mineralized source rock. And with that, a very broad halo of copper mineralization. Hole 5, our northernmost hole we drilled, was very similar to hole 3 over its length. So 804 meters from top to bottom of 0.2% copper equivalent. So still very, very strongly anomalous. Not crazy high grades, but very good to see. Hole 6 and hole 7 was sort of designed to infill the higher grade parts where we saw in hole 4 and the bottom of hole 2. And they encountered hole 7 near surface, some very strong grades, 105 meters at 0.53% copper equivalent near surface. 855 meters at 0.3 equivalent for the whole hole, and lower intercepts, you know, 173 meters at 0.42 down deep, not quite as eye-poppingly high grade as hole 4, but this is still stepped out over about 100 meters from it, and still encountering a lot of support. And same story in hole 6, which was actually stepped out to the east. And as we drilled into that plane marginal to the intrusion, lower 325 meters of almost 0.8% copper equivalent, 127 meters within that of 0.5% copper equivalent, and that's with some decent gold grade down deep, 0.17 gold, 0.14 gold over the broader interval, so much higher than historically discovered in that low gold north zone, which is near surface. So really in 2022, we sort of proved up the concept that there exists a source, a high grade source on the Knack property at depth. The true orientation and location of that is still yet to be determined, because we stuck along that drill fence, that north-south fence. It still leaves a lot of questions. And so this is now looking forward to planning for 2023. And we really want to get a proper 3-point intersection on those dikes and determine an orientation and see, you know, because we know it is later and is cutting the intrusive, the historically underexplored intrusive stock to the east could be a prime target. So yeah, we'll go through the 2023 plan, just go through a few photos of the mineralization that we're seeing and why we're pretty excited. Get these really nice bornite veins in the plagiauric dike, which, you know, they don't alter this side of the host rock. Excellent to see. We've got chalcocite as well, hypogene chalcocite, commonly associated with bornite, and that's a very high grade copper mineral. So that's also very interesting to see. And in hole 2, we also have these zones of what look like a bit of an epithermal textured overprint with this hydrothermal chalcopyrite quartz breccia And actually this sample here, 238 meters, this meter interval graded over 20 grams per ton gold. So there's still these high grade blips in there as well, which also show some hints of, you know, potentially other really higher grade parts of the property. And because it's over such a big area, like it's really, like it's, you know, there's still a ton of potential going forward. Yeah, a bit more detail on these bornite bearing dikes. This is down deep in hole 2. All of the dark minerals you see here, that is all disseminated bornite. Kind of grades to chalcopyrite in places, and then we'll grade back to bornite. See the bornite veins, bornite disseminations in the row above it in the core boxes. And hole 3, still see the same style of mineralization. Down deep in the intrusive, you see thick bornite veins, often with chalcocite associated with them. Up a bit shallower, some really interesting chalcopyrite and magnetite hydrothermal breccia. So there's a lot of different phases of veining, a lot of different phases of mineralization, all lending to a probably quite a complex story, but this is really good to see in a porphyry setting. Very geologically active, and a lot of that activity is bringing in copper and gold mineralized sulfides. Excellent to see. Same deal in hole 4. We see this plagiospheric dike with coarsely disseminated and vein-hosted bornite. We see a lot of these mineralized veins cutting both, you know, intrusive dikes and the bounding host rock. So we have this later phase of mineralization. Being really good to see. Bit of a zoom in. All of this darker stuff within this dike is bornite disseminations. Yeah, and then, you know, just a lot of sulfur in the fluids as well, which you can see. This is all anhydrite, so calcium sulfate mineral, and that itself hosts quite a bit of chalcopyrite and actually some molybdenite in there. And then just big, thick bornite veins closer to surface. Really exciting to see. And moving through some of the other stuff we would see in hole 6, very densely bornite disseminated zone within the host intrusion. Very dense chalcopyrite dissemination. So we're seeing really widespread instances of very strong visual mineralization. Yeah, and so this is a bit more of a bleached instance of that plagiospheric dike. And again, abundant bornite disseminations. Really interesting. This darker mineral here, this is chalcocite again. Really interesting network texture within this, almost class-like. It's not. It's just a lens of sulfide, but very, very interesting to see. And yeah, so just a bit of a subsurface 3D view. These are sort of the historically defined zones. These deeper holes, anything labeled is what we drilled in 2022. Anything not labeled is the extent of the historical drilling. So very apparent to see, even from this view, that they really just scratched the surface, and we're really the first people to test it to any sort of depth extent. And the result of that is, you know, really, really broad zones of good mineralization, some hints of, you know, a potentially very high grade source, and what's also I haven't touched on as much as I probably should have, but really expanded that near surface high gold grade zone. So there's still abundant near surface potential of really high grade gold and copper mineralization. And just a like super quick interpretation of where we're seeing our higher zones and our distribution. And this is actually completely different from what was historically inferred. The historical zones were near surface. None of this was even known to any depth, really, by historical operators. So there's a lot of potential here to expand upon what we discovered. As you can see from the historical drilling, nothing is being tested to the west, and we have a lot of indication, especially with inferring that this intrusive stock is somewhat dipping to the west. This is a prime target for expanding the exploration. And knowing that the margins of the intrusive stock are some of the most prospective areas, especially in Bell, Grand Isle, and Morrison, the other nearby Babby porphyry deposits, the southern margin is completely untested. So a lot of ground to test. The plan will be to expand in 2023, expand upon the single north-south drill fence we did by stepping out to the east and west, properly targeting these bornite mineralized dikes, properly fleshing out the near surface south zone down here. Knack 2201 and 2 was where, you know, it was a pretty sizable step out from the nearest collars historically, and it is completely open. This hole was really abandoned before it got to any depth. So it's completely open to the west and still for a fair distance to the south and north as well to expand that south high grade copper gold zone. Yeah, so this is a preliminary look at the 2023 planning. We've got a lot of room to step to the west, conveniently all within cut block. A few of these broader step out holes to test the southern margin prospective zone, and a couple holes to the north to really tie into that bornite barren dike and get a true orientation on that, and some near surface high grade south zone expansion holes to yeah, really sort of start the program off in 2023. And as you know, results come in, because we have a really long exploration season, really, you know, there's a lot of options open to have a really robust season in 2023. Currently planned for another sort of 6,000 meter program like we did last year, but with an eye that, you know, it's very likely we would be drilling significantly beyond that. Yeah, and just put this in a bit of geophysical and geological context. This is that Babine porphyry stock intrusive outline, which in the region is interpreted to be the sort of source rocks for a lot of the mineralization marginal to it. And the big IP chargeability halo. The southern margin prospective zone is in a very similar geophysical position and geological position to what hosts some very strong mineralization historically and in 2022, and it's completely untested. And these step back holes also go through a very similar geophysical signature, completely untested, and we have a lot of indication that the mineralization likely continues out to the west. So yeah, that's kind of the plan going forward, and yeah, it'd be great to open it up to questions. Yeah, if anyone wants any clarification on anything or has any other sort of technical questions for me or broader questions for Tony, yeah, now would be the time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Neil. Really appreciate that. I think really quickly, I think something that would be really handy for the viewers is maybe just giving a little bit of a 3D video or kind of a show with your software what it looks like underneath. I think one thing that, you know, people can't quite comprehend and see from a lot of our images online is that, you know, even though there is a lot of historical drilling, most of it is shallow. So our, you know, 7 drill holes, even though they were step outs from the original drill holes, you know, when we go underneath 200 meters, it's not close to anything. So, you know, there's big opportunities, not just, you know, close to where we drilled, but also kind of close to historically where they drilled going underneath. You know, I think people know what they know, and, you know, the big story, I guess, in BC has been the GT triangle. So people tend to gravitate towards the stories that are near, you know, GT gold saddle deposit. But people have to remember that this area was mined far before anything happened in the Golden Triangle with Noranda back in the 70s and the 80s. But one thing people have to realize, last time people drilled here significantly was in the 90s. Copper was at 60 cents a pound. Gold was at $500 an ounce. And you couldn't get to this property without flying in. But now you can back a semi right onto the property. It's close to surface. It's one of the best areas actually to mine and explore in BC, but there just hasn't been any recent big discovery. That's where we come in. And when we come in here, we can actually show that this big deposit does exist. Well, we're going to be the next kind of Golden Triangle area in terms of Babine, and kind of talking about the First Nations. LBN, they're absolutely amazing. They want the same things we want. They want prosperity, and they want it done in a sustainable way. And you can't explore and mine these days unless you do things sustainable. And you know, they want to get revenue and they want jobs, and the forestry industry is disappearing, and really the future is, you know, metals and mining. So as long as it's an area that's not going to impact their food, their salmon, they're all for it. In terms of, you know, dealing with the communities, it's the same way you deal with your family members. You want to keep a good relationship. It's about honesty, it's about transparency, it's about full communication every step of the line. And as Neil said, the first meeting I had was with the community there, and we're in constant correspondence. This is their land. We're lucky to be on it. We're lucky to borrow it and hopefully find this deposit. But you know, I got to say, it's just been a really good relationship so far. And again, it's all about communication. So, how does the mineralization at Knack compare to mineralization in other properties in the region?
Yeah, so it's similar in terms of its distribution, where at least known to date at Knack, it flanks that instance of our large Babine porphyry stock body, sort of central to the property. But it differs in a couple important ways as well. We have a much higher abundance of bornite than was typically described at Morrison, Bell, and Grand Isle. And the instance of that bornite bearing dike, to our knowledge, and from talking to a number of other people familiar with the Bell and Grand Isle deposits, is unique to the Knack property. And so that's an important difference. I think historically, maybe a lot of people wrote this off, and other deposits in the region off, as lower grade and maybe not as attractive, because they were primarily thought of as Bell, Grand Isle, Morrison analogs. Chalcopyrite, kind of middling low gold, plus or minus molybdenum. Whereas the amount of bornite we see, and especially the hypogene chalcocite, which is very unusual, it doesn't really bear a strong comparison to other known deposits, especially in BC. It's quite unique. So really that kind of puts our potential, I would say, significantly above, if we just had chalcopyrite mineralization and it looked like a pure Bell Grand Isle analog, it could be potentially limiting. Whereas, there's a lot of unknowns that definitely warrant some more aggressive exploration here to get to the bottom of what is really going on geologically and what is driving that mineralization. We have this secondary later stage source that's bringing with some potentially very high gold grades and epithermal textures higher up, and these bornite mineralized dikes down deep. So yeah, there's some important differences in what we see here versus other deposits in the region, for sure.
We've had a lot of companies look at our deposits, a lot of world-renowned copper porphyry experts, and they all agree that what they see here is definitely very, very unique, potential to be high grade and very, very big. But companies and experts, they tend to put things into a certain box, and how can you compare it to other things in the region or even globally? And one thing they all agree on, this is really like nothing they've ever seen. So really kind of finding that analog is challenging for them. Makes them think a bit, but it kind of gives you an example of the upside that we have here.
When it puts us in as a geologist, it's exciting too, right? Like, it's kind of boring to just be on the production side and drill off something, what it is. It's compelling to have these questions, and these are really good problems to have to solve, right? Trying to figure out where this bornite is coming from is a great problem to have from an exploration perspective. And the reward of answering that question, could be a potential economic deposit. So yeah, really, really actually kind of exciting.
I guess one more question, Neil, if no one else has any. Can you talk about the southern intrusive of where we want to drill? South of the intrusive, we've drilled along a fence just west of it. Talk about the upside of that southern intrusive and why it's so similar to the area that we've already drilled, and if we hit something there, why that really kind of creates a lot more blue sky.
Well, it's in the exact same geophysical position with respect to the expression of alteration associated with the likely associated with the emplacement of that Babine porphyry stock body. So it's located in a very prospective location, and that's true of the geology as well. The geology is a little bit less understood in that area because it's under a lot of cover, and the historical drilling is very sparse to non-existent. There's 3 holes that were drilled within the bounds of the intrusive to the north, but the closest hole is about 600 meters away. So that's a big difference. So it's really a big question mark right now. It's in a very prospective location. It was historically a little bit more difficult to access when everything had to be helicoptered in, and they had their established exploration trail. We have in the permit to do a bit more of an exploration trail out to that region. We don't have a ton of holes planned in that area because it is a question mark, but that could change if we hit compelling mineralization. And we think there's a pretty high likelihood that we do in that area, given what we know now from the deeper 2023 or 2022 drilling and the historical holes in the area. So yeah, it's just, unfortunately that area is really underexplored, but fortunately for us, that leaves us, a lot of potential to really expand this. And if that, we hit at that zone, that really opens things up. I think there's a lot of potential just, proximal to what we drilled in 2022. This would be dramatically expanding the footprint of known mineralization.
Thanks, Neil. So really quickly before we had the call, people think my job's to promote, but I always tell the same story. We had a property in Nevada. Mark Bradley, who's still our QP, is on the call. He was our geo for us, helping us out with the Nevada, and that just wasn't the project for us. It was too expensive. 1,000 meters of overburden. That's for big companies. And my uncle, Gary Artmott, he did the original mapping for Grasberg, for Freeport, exploration geologist. He was head of the crew. And he was very intimate and, an expert in porphyries. And he was my uncle, my closest uncle. And he came to me and he said, you guys are going to fail in Nevada. And everything that ended up happening to us in Nevada that I kind of just told you about ended up happening. And right before we started drilling, he came to me and he said, I love you. You're my favorite nephew. And he said, I don't want to see you fail with this American Eagle. He goes, I got a great property. It's called Knack. And he said, we've been working on it for a year. We got off another company. It's private right now. I want you guys to take it. And he goes, what I see here, I see the second best target geophysically in terms of anomaly that I've ever seen in my life next to Grasberg. I told him he was crazy. And what I saw was what a lot of retail, I think, still sees. You see a lot of historical drilling, but they don't look into the details that, the average depth was 200 meters. You couldn't access this site before. And we really took a gamble. And we drilled, right off our first drill hole, we hit something. And after that first drill hole, Gary unfortunately passed away. But, Steve McMullen's on the call right now. Steve McMullen, before we got this property, I loved my uncle, but I said, we're not going to just buy it because of my close relationship with you. Geos always think the projects are great. So we needed kind of a third party to be involved. And because everything was based on geophysics, we hired what we thought was the best geophysics expert in the world that's freelance. His name's Steve McMullen. He worked with Ivanhoe and helped make the Kamoa discovery in the Congo. So Steve, you're on the call right now. I'm going to unmute you and maybe you can kind of talk really high level about what you and Gary saw, what got you guys so excited and why you love this project on a geophysics level, and which led us to drill it.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. What led us to the project was there was the known mineralized zones, which were very shallow, as you've explained, but there's very solid evidence for continuation of the system at depth. So we're looking for, the big tonnage swing for the fences kind of scale of the project, which I think has come through with remarkable intercepts of copper equivalent. And it's very good geophysics coverage, relative to other grassroots projects of an airborne EM ZTEM survey, a high resolution magnetic survey, and shallow but very interesting IP resistivity anomalies, which was really the basis for the shallow drilling by previous operators. So we've got depth interpretation, geophysical modeling down to several kilometers depth, which gives us a number of targets. The concentration on the drilling this year or last year was on the western margin. And as Neil said, this is kind of annular alteration zones around a major intrusive body, which is driving the system. And that southern margin of that intrusive is very interesting. It's exactly the same sort of structural scenario and geophysical scenario as what we have this year, which was quite successful technically.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve. And thank you for everyone for joining the call. We're going to wrap it up right now. We have a lot of catalysts ahead. Planning to drill early June, end of May. Hopefully going to get our 5-year permits within the next couple of weeks. Announce our exploration agreement with the local communities, the LBN. And then, assays are going to come out all throughout the year. It's like a tree falling in the forest. No one's around. Does it really make a noise? The same with these junior companies. I think one of the issues with us, people just don't know about us yet. And I think that can change with a snap. And we're gonna have a lot of surprises coming out. I just want people to stay tuned, spread the word, and we're gonna keep on doing marketing and tell the world why we're the 0.1% of those deposits out there, and why American Eagle Gold is a really good opportunity. So if you have any questions, my email is available on the website, amorrow@americaneaglegold.ca. Always have to talk to any current or potential investors, whether you put $100 or $100,000 in. That's your money well earned. We want to do right by you, and we're happy to have a meeting. So thank you very much for everyone's time. Please stay tuned.